You are, very likely, wondering what exactly this video is. Octopath Traveler II is one of my favorite games to have come out in the past few years, and with its second anniversary coming up, I wanted to do something to commemorate this little underrated gem of an RPG sequel. Of course, I could have done something more straightforward like a ranking video, but I figured I could be more creative than that. I've always been intrigued by challenge runs in the Octopath games, especially those that use fewer than the full party of 4. There are a lot of solo runs out there for both of these games, and those are certainly interesting. But my problem is that I am, by my own admission, kind of terrible at most self-imposed challenges in video games, and I derive little enjoyment from throwing myself repeatedly against a brick wall so that I can, as they say, get good. However, while solo challenges are a little out of my depth, Octopath 2 does present a fine setup for an alternative. This is because it occasionally takes its ensemble cast of 8 and splits them up into 4 pairs for short storylines called crossed paths that allow these travelers to interact with each other organically as opposed to the detached commentary thing they do elsewhere. Noted enjoyer of homoerotic subtext that I am, I was naturally drawn to one of these crossed path pairs in particular, namely the one that's 2 guys. I got into these two so much that I even began writing fanfiction about them last year, based on the exact premise of focusing on the crossed path mechanic as opposed to wrangling together the full group of 8 into a single cohesive storyline. And now, I've gotten the idea of playing the game in accordance with the story I wrote, about the torrid love affair of 2 men in a pseudo-19th century setting beating the odds and finding happiness together. Also, there's a lot of smut involved, but I mostly have to cut out that part for this video. So that's right, this is a challenge run that doubles as the recreation of a fanfiction. I dare you to find another video on YouTube that can claim the same. But in case you haven't read my fic, or played Octopath Traveler 2 for that matter, but still want to listen to me be unhinged about a gay ship, I'll be filling in the relevant narrative context so you know what's going on. I'll be focusing less on explaining basic Octopath gameplay mechanics, because I assume that if you're watching this more for the challenge run aspect, then you're already going to be familiar with those. The goal here is simply to defeat Osvald and Partitio's final bosses using only those characters, although I did limit myself in other ways that I'll talk about as we go along. But let's not waste any more time getting into this tale of a beefy bisexual bear out for revenge, and a sunshine himbo merchant whom fandom has dubbed the socialist cowboy in the same way that Brokeback Mountain is called the gay cowboy movie, in that it's technically incorrect on both counts, but close enough to where we're just gonna go with it anyway. Now, the opening chapters require 0 gameplay commentary, because even in a normal run, they're self-contained episodes that force you to use only one character. That does, however, give me plenty of space to set up the story. We open with an 8-year-old Partitio Yellowill traveling to a new silver mining settlement founded by his 2 dads. And if you think my shipping goggles are already strapped on too tight because I'm saying that he has 2 dads, you would be wrong. We'll come back to that. Cut to 8 years later, Ores Rush is booming, and Partitio and his dads are incredibly wealthy. Oh, and by the way, yes, Partitio's name is just Partition with the last letter cut off. Is this a clever wink at his defining character trait? Yes.
Wealth should be spread around.
Is it additionally the sort of incredibly dumb name you'd only ever see in an RPG? Also yes. All is not well with him, however, as the silver bubble is about to burst and Partitio's dads are getting divorced. There's a brief custody battle, but Partitio decides to remain in Ores Rush with his biological father, while his other father sets off to make his fortune elsewhere. Following another 8-year time skip, the boomtown has gone bust. Partitio's father is sick and bedridden, and all of Ores Rush is overworked and starving because the unknown man who bought the land back is taxing them all to death. Naturally, Partitio is very sad about this, and this bully of a land agent mocks him for crying. You wouldn't believe how much Wild West-flavored toxic masculinity I wrangled out of this one exchange. It's beautiful. Anyway, here's where my story diverges from canon. Partitio goes to challenge the dirty tax collectors, but he loses the battle and is promptly arrested and shipped off to the worst prison in the world. Enter our second protagonist. 5 years ago, university professor and inexplicably hunky math nerd Osvald V. Van Steen returns one day to find his house has gone up in flames with his wife and daughter inside. He's put on trial for double homicide and sentenced to life in prison, but not before dramatically swearing revenge against the jealous colleague who destroyed his life. In the present, Osvald, now rocking his iconic giant murder hobo look, is a fixture at Frigid Isle, a frozen hellhole where the inmates work until they die at the behest of a corrupt and abusive prison administration. He's forced to wear a special muzzle to prevent him from using magic, which I have to say is a clever way to introduce one of the most magically oriented members of the cast. Both of these opening chapters are excellent, just saying. Partitio's develops its protagonist and setting through multiple time skips, while Osvald feels appropriately claustrophobic for a prison where everything is stacked against him. Osvald hasn't been idle, though. He's been plotting his escape, and in the canon sequence of events, he enlists the help of a fellow inmate, sneaks through a tunnel beneath the prison, fights off the warden, and then escapes the island in a boat made out of ice that he somehow survives on in the open ocean for 4 days. I assume it's because Osvald's body hair situation can best be summed up by this image. But in my story, Partitio gets sent to Frigid Isle and gets assigned to be Osvald's cellmate. Oh my god, they were cellmates! Things start off rocky, but after Partitio demonstrates that he's an all-around nice guy, and also that he knows some basic fire magic, and Osvald saves Partitio from freezing to death as they huddle together for warmth, another classic fanfic trope, they become close allies. Partitio gets a lucky opportunity and steals the key to Osvald's muzzle, after which they have a significant gay foreshadowing moment, and then they go through a similar escape plan to the one in canon, although they do successfully steal the inspector's ship and ride that off the island, so I don't have to figure out how that ice boat thing would have worked with both of them. They arrive at a little fishing village, and in canon, this is one of several places where Osvald tells us about
this fire in my breast.
We'll be returning to Osvald's fiery breasts later on. They hop a ferry back to the western continent, return to Orsrush, and beat up the land agent for real this time, where Partitio learns that the guy's boss is none other than his second father, Rock Brilliant. Yes, his name is also stupid. Partitio has a tearful reunion with his father, who gifts his son with his iconic fedora, which already coordinates perfectly with Partitio's outfit because there's not a single straight man in this family. Partitio asks to come along with Osvald on his revenge mission, even though he's not crazy about revenge, because he's already having very gay feelings about his former cellmate. And if you think that's just my shipping goggles again, here's the line Partitio has only if you recruit him with Osvald.
There's a fire burning in those bright eyes of yours. Ambition and conviction in equal measure.
Staring deeply into another man's eyes is just so heterosexual, you know. So to sum up, Partitio is leaving behind Bio Daddy to hit the road with Sex Daddy so he can track down Bad Daddy. That's not confusing in the slightest. Oh, and if you're wondering about the daddy thing, Osvald is 14 years older than Partitio. Spicy. This is at last where the challenge starts, because almost everything from this point onward is balanced around the player having a full party of 4, which you'll notice that we only have half of. In my fanfiction, the characters next head south to Osvald's old home in Conning Creek, but I'm going to need to get them some levels and better gear if they're to have any hope of clearing the later chapters. I'm not allowing any grinding in this playthrough, although optional dungeons are fair game for gaining experience and items. There's a few of these available, which are a good showcase of how these two work as a team. Osvald's spells are great for clearing large groups of regular enemies, and while Partitio's regular options are more limited, he's also the tankier of these two characters, which makes absolutely no sense until you realize that Osvald's base stat line was copied directly from that of the much twinkier scholar of the first game. Tragic, truly. One other limitation I put in place for myself is that I want to avoid using secondary jobs. These grant the characters access to new weapons and skills as well as stat upgrades, so not using them is an objective downgrade in every way. except that by keeping them in their base jobs, they'll stay in their default outfits, which is what they wear when running around the world. While I won't deny that there's a certain allure to some of the job outfits, like how Hunter turns all the characters into furries, or dancers that, I find I prefer the continuity. And this will be slightly more impressive if I can get through the whole game like this. Secondary jobs are certainly not needed versus the Monarch, the first optional boss. This is largely on account of Partitio's hired help, a merchant ability that can deal massive damage to all enemies provided you can afford it, because Octopath Traveler is one of the few RPGs out there where money actually matters since it's also a combat resource. Hired help doesn't scale with level or stats as far as I know, so it's grossly overpowered in the early and mid-game and can still put in serious work later on. It's best only used on bosses to conserve money, although it helps significantly that Osvald can beat up NPCs and steal their stuff, which is great for getting both extra cash and better gear. Partitio ordinarily objects to such behavior on moral grounds, because he is a good boy who buys his items like a normal person, but I can't really blame him for not being able to say no to a hunky sugar daddy. There's also Kates and Octopuffs, rare spawn enemies that award massive amounts of money and experience provided you can beat them before they run away. They're not unique to this challenge run, but I want to show off whenever I get one in case anyone thinks I'm farming them. I get 3 total in this segment before Osvald's Chapter 3, so a bit lucky, but nothing unreasonable. It's also at this point worth mentioning Partitio's ability to hire people to follow him around and assist in combat. There are usually better things to do with his turns than summoning NPCs, but Partitio has a unique passive feature that gives him special perks with each of his hires. Most function out of combat, like giving him more money on sales or reducing purchase costs, but a few affect his combat abilities that cost money. My go-to NPC has to be this guy, whose Chivalry perk reduces the cost of hired help by 20%. Incredibly useful considering how important hired help will be in boss fights. I do feel a little bad though for this small-town husband and father trailing after these 2 guys and having to stand awkwardly in a corner while they explore each other's bodies. But getting back to the story, Osvald returns to his burned-out home and the underground cave laboratory he has, like that's just a normal thing, and has a quick and frankly unremarkable showdown with his former research assistant to prove that he is in fact who he says he is. He then rampages through the local guard outpost because they were involved in the conspiracy to frame him. This is a fairly easy section unless Osvald gets ganged up on, because again, he's the squishy one here somehow. Stenvar, the captain of the guards, is kind enough to confirm that Osvald is indeed a bear, and that's not just my liberal usage of modern gay lingo. He looks intimidating, but max-boosted hired help beastlings shred through his minions and leave him weak enough to break and then finish off shortly after. Before they leave town, Clarissa offers to let the pair stay the night. But oh no, there's only one bed! Just hitting all the fanfic hallmarks over here. Once back on the road, it's across the sea again to the eastern continent, with Partitio hot on the trail of his estranged second father in the industrialized city of Clockbank. This place marks the first time I have to deal with a reputation mechanic, on account of Osvald staring rudely at NPCs one too many times. Fortunately, that's quickly fixed by bribing the local bartender. Just go with it. And also that Partitio doesn't care at all if Osvald stares rudely at him. Case in point, the single most homoerotic exchange in all of Octopath 2. A conversation so obviously gay I just dressed it up a little with Partitio getting drunk and then going upstairs to give his gag reflex a workout. One hangover and some plot shenanigans later, and Partitio's got to fight off a guard dog if he wants to meet Rock. This is Garnet, an adorable little terrier on the overworld who blows up into a massive bulldog as a boss. Octopath bosses get comically huge all the time, but this one is by far the silliest. These two are so good Garnet can't even get an action in though. Partitio with his full power passive, combined with Osvald's elemental barrage nailing 2 of her weaknesses, breaks her easily, and then another round of max-boosted beastlings finishes her off. This is why Daddy needs to keep mugging all those innocent bystanders, so Baby can afford to keep pulling mercenaries out of his ass, because you can't prove that's not where those come from. Hashtag couple goals, am I right? Following that nonsense, Rock taunts his sort of son by offering to sell the rights to the steam engine that made his fortune. So Partitio is off to make a cool 80 billion, so maybe his dads will get back together, and also so Rock will maybe be less of a self-centered asshole. Along the way, he and Osvald stop in at my favorite city in the game, New Delsta, where they go through the first part of their cross-path story, which is over in roughly 5 minutes, and honestly not that interesting anyway. What is interesting is that later they hang out at a bar and meet some friendly neighborhood crossdressers, because that's implied to be a thing in the Brightlands, and was absolutely a thing in the real-life cities I based my interpretation of New Delsta on. They help Partitio feel better about being gay, at least until one of them starts hitting on Osvald, which makes him so jealous that when they get back to their hotel room, Partitio shows Osvald how good he is at riding. Save a horse, get ridden by a cowboy? Now Osvald and Partitio are headed north in a whirlwind of passionate sodomy, and I decide to try my hand at another optional dungeon along the way. All this time I've been playing it risky with the character's HP, because aside from Partitio's mad power napping skills, neither of them have any healing abilities, and staying stocked up on items is annoying. This proves to be a problem when I face the boss, which instantly grapples Partitio with its naughty tentacles, and then demolishes Osvald, giving me my first game over. Let's try that again. A second attempt, and now actually healed up, Partitio gets grabbed again.
Just slip on in.
Bottoms, Jesus Christ. But Osvald is able to survive long enough this time to break the giant plant and save Partitio's poor, abused orifices, after which hired help makes quick work of it as per usual. Hey, maybe I should write a fic about this. Back in the Winterlands, Osvald can pick up his first EX skill, Teach. It's pretty useless, but it does come with a suggestive visual. I also got another Octopath on the road to Winterbloom, so that's fun. In town, it's time for Partitio's first scent of commerce, which is a type of glorified side quest that only he can do. It's more tedious to do this one than in a normal run, because Partitio has to hire each of the musicians one at a time instead of having 3 travelers to escort them all at once, but there's no challenge to it, and one of them gives me an excuse to head over to Crackeridge for some more levels and stolen goods from NPCs. This is also where Partitio picks up his first EX skill. Negotiate schedule is gimmicky, but at least I do occasionally think about using it. Once that's all done, Partitio accomplishes his goal of helping to patent the gramophone, which functions as an in-game sound test feature, and he and Osvald retire to the inn for a hot bath and a night of salad tossing. Then they have an argument centering around how Osvald has been walking around all this time with that extremely conspicuous prison collar around his neck, which is kind of dumb and kind of kinky, but mostly just makes Partitio sad because of the psychological implications. Osvald isn't happy to have this pointed out, and at this point they're both obviously in love with each other, but are struggling to come to terms with that for a variety of reasons, so now they're not speaking. Awful timing, too, because following my story, the next chapter boss is a massive step up from Garnet, especially because it's got enough HP to live through even the strongest hired help summon. Time for more optional dungeons. There's quite a few in the mid-game, although this pair can't access one of them because neither of them is able to knock out the NPC guarding the entrance. It's so weird that Osvald beats people up all the time, and Partitio has multiple conversations where he talks about getting into tavern brawls, and yet they don't have any way around an obstacle like this. Good thing neither of their stories take them to Stormhail, because that entire part of the map is also blocked off by an NPC. It's not a big problem in terms of dungeons, though, because there are still other options. I get another Octopath on the way through the desert, then yet another just before the battle with the boss of the Quicksand Jail. Talk about lucky. The Lord of the Sands may or may not be a nod to Dune. I don't know, did that book invent the concept of giant sandworms? But either way, the beastlings take care of the minions before I have to summon the incredibly expensive veteran soldiers to guarantee a kill on the boss. Oh, and then I get another Octopath as I'm leaving the desert and heading toward Wellgrove. I swear I'm not using an Octopath pot to increase the chances of that happening. I finish off this leveling section with the Sunken Maw, which has regular enemies tuned for characters in the mid-30s, but a quest boss that's significantly weaker for no apparent reason. It's kind of a letdown, actually. But now back to the story. Osvald and Partitio get to Montwise and infiltrate Harvey's incredibly evil underground lab, where they're attacked by a magical construct powered by the soul of Osvald's murdered wife. There's no time to unpack all that trauma, though, because the grieving golem is anything but a joke of a boss. I try to get cute with bottled nightmares at the start, but this thing deals a ton of damage and also gets multiple attacks per turn. Partitio is only able to live long enough to revive Osvald and break the boss with a combination of the Void Amulet to reduce shadow damage, which you can get off an NPC in Wellgrove if you're wondering, and his Hang Tough passive allowing him to survive at 1 HP. Partitio's latent power fully refreshing his BP is also essential to getting in enough damage with hired help after the golem is broken. Although, as mentioned earlier, it can survive a max-boosted veteran soldiers. I'm almost down after it regains its shields and increases its actions per turn, so I throw caution to the wind, max out Partitio's BP again, and do another boosted veteran soldier summon, which is just enough to take the golem out. Yikes, that does not bode well for some of the upcoming bosses. But back to the trauma. Things get worse for Osvald when it's revealed that his daughter is actually alive, but she's been brainwashed into believing that Harvey is her father. And Harvey escaped so he can sacrifice her to gain some even more evil magical power. Osvald, understandably, takes this poorly, and he runs off to a nearby abandoned church where Partitio tracks him down and declares that he's going to help Osvald defeat Harvey and rescue Elena. And then, only now after their mouths have been on and in vastly more intimate parts of each other's bodies, do they at last have their first kiss. Here, though, is one place where story and gameplay work against each other. The logical next step in the leveling curve would be Partitio's Chapter 3, wherein he stimulates the economy of ye olde medieval JRPG village by spontaneously developing the concept of the department store, because his story is delightfully stupid like that. But the end of Osvald's story has a far greater sense of urgency. His daughter has been kidnapped and is about to be sacrificed by his mustache-twirling rival. Kind of a big deal. Of course, in a video game, you can just mess around forever and it'll be fine, but in a story with stakes and pacing and so forth, it would be kind of silly if I did that. So, we're doing Osvald's final boss next. But there is time for one more optional dungeon, the Forsaken Graveyard, conveniently located just outside of Montwise. I die to some generic enemies here, so that doesn't feel great, but I've resigned myself to that happening more often since we're approaching endgame and I'm still operating under a bunch of handicaps here, one of which I haven't even mentioned yet. The boss of the graveyard, the Devourer of Dreams, has less HP than the Grieving Golem, but don't let that fool you. Its gimmick of obscuring your character's turn order matters less when you only have 2 of them. But then, you only have 2 of them, and this boss, like basically all of them in the late game, can attack multiple times per turn. Sleep is a real nuisance here, and at this point I'm so frustrated that I just do 3 max boost veteran soldiers in a row without even bothering to break the boss first. That does get me the win, although with Osvald knocked out meaning he doesn't get any of the experience. No great loss, since with mugging he's been consistently 3 or 4 levels higher than Partitio anyway, but still, this was a sloppy fight. And worse, I've now been so reliant on hired help that I'm actually running low on money. I don't even have enough currently to buy the ship, which would open up a ton of optional goodies, except that only happens later in the fanfiction, so I can't do it now even if I could afford it. The road to Gravel is even more of a mess, and I get several more game overs against generic enemies here. Everything just hits too hard, especially for Osvald, and enemies get too many attacks in compared to me only having 2 per turn. I also have to worry about conserving hired help uses for the remaining bosses, although I do eventually overcome my money issues by selling off a bunch of unused equipment I'd gotten from chests and NPCs. At the start of Osvald's last chapter, he has to mug several possessed NPCs, and while these are always one-on-one fights, I still lose to one of them. Not having a secondary job really limits the character's options in situations like this. After I get past those guys and into the Dusk-Ruined Shrine, I have a revelation. Up until this point, I've been treating this like a normal run with regard to nuts, Octopath's permanent stat boosters. I've been stockpiling all the ones I've obtained for the end like I always do. But here, it occurs to me that I'm about to face down one of the 2 final bosses of this run. So I say screw it, and have Osvald and Partitio nut all over themselves before heading any further. Those extra stats don't make a huge difference, but they help with survivability. I can at least say that I never die to any regular enemies after this point. And now comes the moment where Osvald gets to take his revenge, or at least after he manifests a giant laser beam powered by love in order to save his daughter, which is coincidentally the elusive one true magic that he's been trying to puzzle out mathematically this entire time. Harvey is an interesting final boss, because while he's certainly imposing and loves to chew the scenery like nobody's business, he's also a little too predictable for his own good. Hired help beastlings destroy his elemental minions, and then Harvey's initial weakness to all 3 types of elemental barrage damage make him surprisingly easy to break and then blitz with veteran soldiers. He can inflict sleep with his really boring lectures, but since almost all the damage here is magical, Osvald's not as squishy as he normally is. Harvey gets 3 turns in a row near the end and obliterates Osvald, but Partitio revives him just in time for the finishing blow. Harvey dies, although the English localization is a bit unclear on that point, and Elena is saved. Osvald and Partitio bring her back to Clarissa in Conning Creek to recover her memories and also free up Osvald to keep doing JRPG stuff. And it's here that I'd like to thank the writers for not implying anything romantic between Osvald and Clarissa. It would have been so easy to do the heteronormative thing here and make them out to be a family unit with Elena, but nope, Osvald's free to swing both ways, which he does in canon via his story's last party banter, where he comes to appreciate just how important Partitio has been to him on his journey. Given how vastly different their relationship is in my fanfiction, I couldn't copy this conversation wholesale, but instead I had them make their way down to the nearby beach, where Osvald finally ditches his prison garb and then goes skinny dipping. Partitio is both confused and turned on, but they agree to keep traveling together, and it's basically understood that they love each other even though they still haven't said that part out loud. Now it's off to Wellgrove to deal with all that department store stuff. I'm not even going to bother figuring out how parts of this chapter work without fast travel. But the short version is that Partitio revitalizes the town while dropping a bunch of really suggestive lines in the process, like how he'd be willing to buy the used toilet paper of his noble benefactor, or even strip for him.
Do you want me to take my shirt off or something?
There's also this out-of-context gem.
I've got a handle on this pickle now.
All of this leads to an unexpected boss battle when Alron's estate is turned into a steam room. I'd make a bathhouse joke here, but frankly it'd be kind of a stretch. The enemy this time is Thurston, Rock's disgruntled former secretary who thinks that if he kills Partitio he can get his job back. Doesn't make a ton of sense, but sure. Thurston is one of the tougher mid-game bosses, but not even his overtuned wrench-throwing skills can hold a candle to a pair who've already beaten Harvey. In fact, they're so overpowered that they reveal a consistent issue with getting too strong for bosses in this game. Many of them have multiple phases with dialogue in between, and if you do too much damage to them at once, they'll be rushed through their phases but still kept alive until they're done talking. In this case, you have to destroy Thurston's machine once to reveal him in the mist so you can hit him, then let him do his yapping and rebuild his machine, then break it again so you can hit him one more time to end the fight. Partitio is rewarded with the biggest banknote in history, and then he comes across Osvald who's been doing some shopping and now dresses like in his ending CG. Daddy just got dapper. Now remember that joke about Osvald's fiery breasts? Well, in a party banter in this chapter, there's an extended innuendo about peaches that goes completely over Partitio's head because it's about Agnia, and it really seems that he's just not that into girls. See also another party banter where Casti makes up a story about the two of them having a drunken hookup, and Partitio, the hard-drinking pseudo-Wild West cowboy, is just completely thrown for a loop at the suggestion that he might have had a one-night stand with a woman. There's increasingly no heterosexual explanation for you, honey. In keeping with that, Partitio proceeds to enjoy Osvald's big, juicy, fuzzy peaches. Yummy. Oh, and then he just casually buys a ship, as you do. There's a whole bunch of stuff that opens up once you can sail on the ocean, including some more optional dungeons and bosses. But I just grab all the floating chests on the overworld to make back the money I spent on the ship. There's only one story boss left now to finish off this challenge, and since I'm so close to the end, I'm anxious to see if I can do it. I even equipped the Scholar passive that reduces the random encounter rate, because levels just don't matter all that much at this point. Once on Rock's private island, Partitio breaks into the factory with the help of an intrepid reporter named Ori, who I haven't had a reason to talk about yet. And then he shows up at the big public reveal of the latest steam engine model with payment in hand. Rock refuses to take a check, Alron shows up on a ship with 80 billion in hard cash, and then Rock gets so angry that he tries to run over Partitio with a train. Again, this story is delightfully stupid. The so-called Steam Tank Obsidian is a complicated boss with 4 parts, and in my first attempt, they all get to move before Partitio and promptly give me my first in-story game over. Congratulations, Rock, you get a sticker. Just maybe don't show that one off to your ex. Next time, I get a more favorable turn order, and a few hired help beastlings break down the weaker train parts. Osvald gets in a fully powered-up blast of the one true magic, the veteran soldiers do their thing, Rock gets to rattle off his big villain monologue, and then one last hit finishes him off with the power of money. In the game, Rock rambles about how he got addicted to conspicuous consumption, and then asks to be left to die, only for Partitio to offer for them to go into business together because he's such a good boy like that. My story expands on this, having the two of them come out to each other and then affirm that they're basically father and son, which preserves the idea of Partitio and Rock as character foils while adding in the extra layer of them being gay and struggling with homophobia. And hey, that's basically canon, at least in Rock's case, because the next time we see him, he's in Orsrush having made up with Pap off-screen. Yeah, Partitio's biological father's name is Pap. I've written smut of these two NPCs, what am I even doing with my life? Even so, Partitio having 2 daddies really isn't hard to see at all. Not when Rock hangs out in Pap's bedroom at night in the postgame, and when in the epilogue Pap suggests that they retire and open a shop together. It's not subtle. Rock is the final story boss for these two guys, but their tale isn't quite done yet. For one thing, Partitio has his last cent of commerce, where he makes contact with a legendary merchant and solves a riddle to unlock a big lore dump library, though that's honestly such a non-entity that I skimmed over it in my story. More important to the fanfiction is Pap inviting his son and Osvald to dinner, where all 4 of these guys sit down and Pap explains that while he's fine with Partitio being gay, he's considerably less fine with his son being involved with an escaped convict. The game itself may have forgotten about that detail, but I sure haven't. Father and son get into a fight, where Partitio's all like, "But I love him, Daddy, and one day he's going to make an honest woman out of me." Just wait until the sequel, Partitio, that actually sort of happens. Meanwhile, Pap's like, "Well, I'm in love with the guy who just got done trying to murder you, so I guess crappy taste in men runs in the family." But in case you made note of the fact that Partitio is also an escaped convict in this continuity, I had Rock tie that loose end off for him, so it's not a plot hole. Anyway, after that tense dinner, Osvald and Partitio return to their rented apartment in Cannelbrine, and on the way talk about how the answer to the one true magic was love all along, which Osvald in canon doesn't understand. Seriously, this guy wouldn't tell his wife he loved her on their wedding day. Partitio isn't terribly happy about that, but when they get back to Cannelbrine, Osvald combines their fire magic with the equation of the one true magic, and it makes a mysterious blue flame which gives them even more profound gay feelings. What could it mean? But do you want to know the really dumb punchline here? The second part of Osvald and Partitio's crossed path story, the thing that inspired all of this in the first place, is unavailable when only using these two characters. The explanation is a little convoluted, but basically unlocking it requires that one of the flames on the loading screen graphic go out. There are 3 different event triggers that can make that happen, but none of them can be accessed without using at least one of the other travelers. This is the only cross-path story to be restricted like this, because I suppose the writers were too nervous about how gay this all is. And it is indeed quite gay. Osvald calls Partitio sweet. The two of them playfully banter about their coffee preferences. Partitio bends his morals a little bit, and then it ends with the two of them stargazing. I'm not even the first fic author to turn this scene into a marriage proposal either, because it's such a perfectly romantic end to these characters' shared storyline. Osvald drops some god lore related to the sacred flame that they conjured earlier. Partitio finally tells Osvald that he loves him, and then they have a sober back and forth about how they can't really marry, because this is still basically the 19th century, but they don't care because they want to be together anyway. Then they make love, and no, I don't have any jokes this time. Osvald gets over his emotional constipation long enough to say that he loves Partitio in return, and Partitio tops it all off by revealing that he had the silver key used to unlock Oswald's prison muzzle made into what are essentially wedding rings as a meaningful callback to the start of their relationship. Almost done now. Remember Ori the intrepid reporter? Well, canon does her kind of dirty, revealing at the 11th hour that she's part of the cult secretly working to summon an evil god into the world, and that her entire personality was faked. That's not the dirty part, though. What is that she's moved by Partitio's selflessness to consider not sacrificing herself to advance the cult's plan, but not enough to stop going through with it. But also she somehow survives to show up as an Easter egg in the ending, while still having died enough to put out the sacred flame. That's all pretty silly. And while I didn't have Ori really appear as a character in my story, I came up with the idea that her witnessing Partitio continuing to believe in the goodness of people while having to deal with the struggle of needing to hide his love for another man was enough to convince her not to put out the flame, and to put together all the evidence she'd taken of Harvey's crimes and deliver them anonymously to Partitio so he can exonerate Osvald. Osvald goes back to trial and has his charges dismissed, so he's a free man now. Partitio, who canonically likes kids, is all on board with being Elena's second father so we can have 2 generations of gay dads. He's also off inventing railroads as he is in canon, and at the end, the couple return to New Delsta to see a show in the theater just like in the game's epilogue. Here, though, they're in a private box rather than on the floor. And by sheer coincidence, who should happen to be in 3 of the other boxes? It's the other 6 travelers, split into their own cross-path pairs, whom they've still never met, but who've been separately going through their own journeys. Now they've all come together and see each other for the first time. The 8 of them get the strange sense that they know each other, and then the show starts, and the story is over. Well, not for me, because the fic ideas just keep on coming. The game closes with this CG, which centers Osvald and Partitio and even has them touching to give me one last bit of canon to squee over. Thank you for traveling with us, indeed. So what have we learned today? Certainly not that hired help is overpowered, because anyone who's played Octopath has known that since 2018. I have serious doubts that any of the other cross-path pairs could even do this challenge without secondary jobs, simply because none of the other travelers get easy access to any comparably broken ability. It's also nothing new for me to say that I can get really invested in my favorite ships, or even that I love working with the 19th century as a historical time frame for fiction. No, if there's something I've realized in making this, it's a point about fanfiction. Fanfic often gets a bad rap outside of transformative spaces, demeaned as badly written, self-indulgent fluff. Obviously, I disagree with that assessment, and not merely because I'm now a fic writer myself. What I've seen with this is that video game challenge runs are in a way very much like fanfiction, and that they go against how the developers intended that you engage with their media for the sake of enjoying a more personalized experience. I wasn't supposed to go through Octopath 2 with only 2 characters. just as I wasn't supposed to read something romantic into the relationship between Osvald and Partitio. And yet I did both. It's a shame that one of these is considered more legitimate than the other. I wouldn't even be surprised if I got angry comments about how I ruined a challenge run video with all this smutty gay commentary. To which I would say, well, you sort of missed the point of all this then, which was that I had fun with this wacky little experiment, and I liked getting to share it with everyone. I've left a link to the fanfiction this challenge run is based around down in the description, in case you'd like to read it for yourself. Here's to Octopath Traveler II on its 2nd anniversary. May its long-term sales be good enough to convince the developers to give us a 3rd game someday that's somehow even gayer. Thanks for watching, everyone. Au revoir.